I recently listened to Pastor Stephen Furtick give a sermon about chains. He spoke of the chains that bind us to one thing or another in this life, and how these chains are determined by our individual choices. We often fail to see the ripple effect caused by even our smallest decisions. We overlook the importance of our choices, and we underestimate the influence these choices have on our life as a whole. The choices that we make on a daily basis become the habits of which we live by, and these habits ultimately form our identity. Many of us naively develop habits which are based on poor choices, and still wonder why we end up unhappy with who we've become. We want people to see a particular identity, but we're unwilling to make the choices and build the habits which support this identity. We want to be respected, but we don't respect ourselves, much less other people. We want to be trusted when we don't trust ourselves. We want to experience love and be loved, but we don't even love ourselves. This is how internal struggle is born, and in these conditions, struggle will flourish. When the seeds of our choices are planted with insecurity, selfishness, fear, and discontent, then the fruits we harvest shall be pain, suffering, and regret. I've always heard stories about people from every corner of the world which experienced some kind of awakening at some point in life which changed the way they viewed themselves and the world completely. I think we've all heard similar stories, but assume that kind of thing only happens in the movies, as if it isn't really possible. We all know people that have changed in some form or fashion, though it often seems to be for the worse. What I'm talking about is a life-changing moment of true clarity and enlightenment, which forever transforms your existence. I'm talking about the kind of change that brings true inner peace and an understanding of one's place in this world. I'm talking about an epiphany that happens when one's former self dies and is replaced by love, understanding, and forgiveness. How many of us know someone that's changed in ways such as these? I didn't believe it was possible. I always assumed that people that thought they had found God were either crazy, weak, or so desperate for meaning in their life that they were willing to accept anything that a preacher told them. I never believed that anyone actually felt or experienced anything real. I just never believed that there was some great force which could connect everything. And even if there was, I didn't believe any religion in history had even come close to accurately describing it. I thought Jesus was a joke, and Christians were idiots. I also resented the fact that some Christians made such a persistent effort to spread the word of God. In my mind, that just made something that I already considered to be a problem even worse. My name is Michael Eaton, and this is the story about how I come to realize that everything I thought I knew about God was wrong. When I was in kindergarten, there was a finger painting contest. I felt like most of the kids were painting stick figures, flowers, and a sun behind some clouds. I painted a cabin on this swamp. I did the water all bubbly and brown and put a dark forest in the background. In hindsight, I think maybe it was a bit of an odd painting for a child that age. I won that finger painting contest, but I always remembered feeling like something lived in that forest that I didn't get to paint. And whatever it wasn't good. To this day, I still remember feeling something strange about that painting. It's as if it haunted me somehow. But from that moment forward, I always knew that I would be an artist. I remember how the teachers would ask each class member what they wanted to be when they grew up. My answer stayed the same for the entirety of my life. An artist, I would answer. And that would be the answer to every teacher that ever asked me that question, in every grade of both elementary and high school. I was quiet as a child and quite shy, I think one of the things that made me excel at art was that I was such an introvert. I felt different even at a young age. Perhaps every child feels different at times. Therefore, maybe some children draw and paint because they struggle to communicate something that's going on inside. I remember feeling like something was churning inside of me, something that people didn't see. Maybe I felt like creating something was a way of showing people something within me. I do remember loving the attention I got for drawing. Being a quiet child doesn't exactly make you the center of attention, but the attention I got from drawing felt like an applause after a magic trick. And so, I continued to draw pretty consistently. But as the years passed, the imagery just seemed to get darker and darker. By the time I was a teenager, I was drawing some of the darkest stuff my mind could animate. I think my family went to a Baptist church on rare occasions when I was little, but my memory of it's vague. My parents divorced the summer after I finished elementary school. Things changed after that. My mom tried to take me to church, and I despised it. Perhaps the intensity of a Pentecostal church was a little more than I could bear at that time. I was actually resentful about the fact that she had taken me to a place where people, in my eyes, were faking the presence of God. Maybe I felt the need to lash out. For whatever reason, I began to openly challenge God. I began to question the possibility of his existence in open conversation, and my artwork started leaning towards sacrilegious. I rebelled pretty hard as a young teen. I got into drinking and drug use at an early age, and I was definitely never known to walk away from a fight. By the time I was 18, my average drawing included demons, devils, skulls, and darkness in general. I was listening to a lot of metal as well. A lot of people thought that aggressive metal music was satanic back then. Christian groups used to have these gatherings where they would burn piles of Ozzy Osbourne merchandise. I thought it was funny. Metal really described what I was feeling at that point in my life. Aggression, rage, isolation. As I increasingly embraced metal music, I began to alienate groups of friends and adopt worse drug habits. I was a pretty well-liked kid in school. I suppose one might even use the word popular. It wasn't other people that alienated me, it was I that alienated them. I just felt different, and so I exaggerated the difference with my lifestyle. I didn't really care what anybody thought. I was going to do what I wanted to do, however harmful it might have been. I'd built a decent argument against God and organized religion by this point in my life, and I was generally prepared to defend my position pretty fiercely. By the time I was in my 20s, I'd done quite a bit of research and had more than a few facts and historical events filed away in my memory that I used as ammunition against anyone that felt the need to defend God. I thought of it as a game, a joke even. I sincerely thought Christians were complete fools, and nothing that anyone could have said would have changed my mind. I was expelled from school early in the 10th grade for fighting and general disciplinary issues, but went to the local community college, took a test, and walked out with my GED. I went to that same school and took college-level classes for about 2 years before transferring into NC State School of Design for architecture. I started tattooing when I was about 20 years old. Learning how to tattoo was difficult 23 years ago. We didn't have YouTube telling us how to set up a tattoo machine. The internet just wasn't a thing at that point, so you had to either find someone to teach you or learn by trial and error. The problem was there were so few people tattooing at that point, and the people that knew how to do it were very secretive. Shops were different back then. People always talk about the criminal stereotype of tattoo shops, but back then, I don't think it was just a stereotype. A lot of shops were owned by bike gangs, and a lot of the artists were living on the edge. I've worked for tattoo shops that were either owned or affiliated with the Hells Angels, Pagans, Crips, Gangster Disciples, and a few other gangs. I worked with a guy that was given the electric chair in the state of Virginia a while back. So yes, tattoo shops were occupied by some seedy characters who led outlaw lifestyles. I did well in college, but tattooing allowed me to live on the fringes of society. That really appealed to my rebellious nature. In addition, it not only allowed me to continue exploring dark subject matter with my artwork, it meant I was going to get paid really well for it. By this time, I'd figured out I could make pretty good money as a professional tattoo artist, and I was drawing and painting the most evil things I could imagine. I always thought it was a joke. I definitely had a feeling of absence in my life, though. There was this void inside of me. I had this feeling that there was something I was missing, as if there was some great secret to the world that was right around the next corner but ever elusive. I knew there was something more to life, but just chased it in all the wrong directions. Nothing was ever enough. No matter what I pursued, it was never enough. Something was always missing. We all think money will fix things. It never seemed to change much for me. I thought becoming a successful tattoo artist was my gateway to happiness and fulfillment. That was wrong too. I was winning dozens of awards for tattooing, but it changed nothing. A wall full of plastic trophies is not the key to life. As a tattooer, one can have a warehouse full of trophies, plaques, and glorified accomplishments. But you're still no better than the last tattoo you put out of the studio. A list of accomplishments is still just that, a list. For everything that I pursued, nothing gave me fulfillment. Nothing made me feel whole as a person. When material things and selfishness become the seeds from which you grow, then the emptiness of an unending desolate pursuit is what you shall yield. You will not find the truth about who you really are inside of your wallet. You will not find the truth in anything that you can win or purchase. But you will find it in sacrifice. It is in the midst of loss that a man sees what he's truly made of. In the face of adversity, we're forced to face the truth about ourselves. In the wake of tragedy, suffering strips away the facade that we work so hard to present on the surface. Therefore, the straightest path to God tends to be the one which involves the most sacrifice. I did more than my share of drinking and drugs growing up. Being in the middle of the party all the time tends to put everything else on the back burner. It's easier not to face the difficult things when life is in the fast lane. We convince ourselves that fast living has made us forget about our real problems. We convince ourselves that the constant distractions are allowing us to successfully move on. Unfortunately, the serious stuff just sits inside and festers as it waits for just the right time to resurface. And then, later in life, we're forced to face the truth about how much of our life was wasted, how many opportunities we've missed, and how many relationships we've failed at. Few things are as difficult to face as the truth about a life not lived in full, and regret is a bitter pill to swallow. My drinking and drug use would persist on and off for most of my life. That isn't to say that I was on drugs for the entirety of my life, because I wasn't. I had many long periods of being clean. I just never seemed to find fulfillment in life, whether I was clean or not. The one constant in my life has been the feeling that something was missing. Time after time, I thought I'd figured out what that missing link was, only to be proven wrong. Throughout my life, I found temporary fulfillment in one goal or another, only to rediscover a feeling of emptiness at the top of each mountain I climbed. Glory for the sheer sake of self-glory is similar to addiction. Once the chase is over, the void within oneself becomes obvious. The many paths of a selfish man all lead to the same place: loneliness. After several years in college, I began to question my decision to be an architect. I had been tattooing throughout school, and my plan was to give it up when I graduated. But after a while, I started to feel as if tattooing had shaped my identity. I felt as if it was part of me. I was very passionate about it and just couldn't justify giving it up. There are definitely days in which I wake up and wonder, what would life be like as an architect? But it just wasn't the path I chose. And so, I quit NC State with only a few credits left before graduation. It was around this time that I was getting a lot of work published in tattoo magazines. Back then, magazines were everything. Your ability to consistently get work into popular magazines directly translated into becoming a well-known tattoo artist among the industry. This was before people did everything online, and if you wanted to know who was who in tattooing, then you followed their work in magazines. All I wanted in life was to be known and respected within the inner circles of tattooing. It's probably safe to say that my commitment to this goal would contribute to multiple failed relationships. I placed tattooing before everything. A lot of people don't realize that becoming a tattoo artist means sacrificing nights and weekends for a lifetime. What most people consider family time in this line of work is known as business hours. It's hard to balance this lifestyle with raising a family, and I would fail miserably at my attempts to do so. I always told myself, one day I'll own a successful shop. I'll have plenty of free time. I'll make up for everything I missed with my children when they were younger. I'll make them understand. Year after year passed and that day never came. I made many moves over the years, some of them out of state. In the end, it didn't matter how much it furthered my career, because it was at the cost of my children. The distance was just too much, and my commitment to family was just too little. I just didn't realize what was most important until it was too late. I've missed every single important moment that one can miss with his children, and that is by far the most difficult thing that I live with. I started to realize how serious this weighed on my heart later in life. The drinking and drug use that was all about partying when I was younger had become self-medication as I'd gotten older. I found it harder and harder to live with the man I'd become, and it seemed impossible to make the changes necessary to correct my mistakes. By the time I was in my mid-30s, I was having to deal with the fact that I'd failed at relationships with 3 sons. It was something that began to define every single day of my life. I just woke up to pain and regret and misery. I didn't feel like I had chosen that. I loved my sons, and I still do. I just didn't know how to be a father. Eventually, I had a daughter. Something had begun to change inside of me even before she was born. I was realizing that my life hadn't turned out as I had hoped, and I was coming to terms with immense regret. I promised myself that I would be the father I'd failed to be in the past. I tried, but I just couldn't make the relationship with her mother work. When her mother left and my daughter was taken away, something inside of me just broke. Something happened. There was no more strength to move on, and no more strength to face the world. Her mother left, and my daughter was removed from my life and kept from me for years. I constantly pleaded to see her, but her mother just wouldn't cooperate. At this point, my life just spiraled away until there was nothing left of me. A lifetime of painful decisions and the results that come from them finally caught up to me. To say I was depressed would be a dramatic understatement. Every single morning that I awoke, the first thought in my head was, I hate my life. I want to die. I tried to get past it, but I couldn't. I craved death. I just wanted it to end so desperately. My life was sheer misery and non-stop agony. I thought about suicide constantly. I practiced tying a noose and thought a lot about places I could tie it that would support the weight of my body. I thought about many forms of suicide. I wasn't afraid. I was past that part. I think a lot of people probably expected that someone would eventually find me dead. I just wanted it to be over. I went into the deepest, darkest depression that just got worse over the period of a few years. I slowly had to sell everything I owned in an attempt to keep paying my bills. Eventually, I would lose everything. I moved into a tiny apartment above a coworker's garage and isolated myself from the world as much as I could. I often didn't work for long periods of time, and the only reason I managed to maintain any kind of a job at all was because I had such a good friend as a shop manager at the time. It was during this period of my life that every single thing inside of me died. The person that had lived the life which brought me to that point was just gone. I was just a shell of a man trying to figure out where to get my next meal. I could barely afford to eat and often went long periods of time without food. Sometimes I'd get desperate enough to steal food. I was very thin and in poor health. A lot of this period's still a blur for me. It's as if long periods of time were just blazing by, and I couldn't accommodate for what I had done or where I had been. My grip on reality was weak at best, and my ability to judge time was just non-existent. At this point of my life, I actually blamed tattooing for a great deal of my problems. In my mind, my relationship with my children had failed because of my job. My drug habits were allowed to flourish because of my job. My obsession with dark imagery and evil subject matter thrived because of my job. I saw tattooing as the root of my problems, but that was all a lie. Tattooing isn't evil. Tattooing is like many other things in this world. It's all about whose hands it's in and how it's being used. It wasn't that tattooing was evil and corrupt and responsible for my problems. It was me. I used tattooing as a vehicle to produce darkness. It was I that embraced the darkness, and tattooing was just the medium which allowed me to express it. It was always my fault. Tattooing can be used for good or evil. It's all in how we as individuals choose to use it. One does not have to embrace the darkness just because the industry is dominated with dark imagery. We are each given the opportunity to be the exception. We can bring the light. We can make a change. We can be the difference. If only we make the choice to do so. We can make tattooing something positive and good and even spiritual. By 2015, I'd isolated myself from the world. I was stricken with severe depression that just seemed to be getting worse. I didn't really speak to family or friends. I was just in so much pain, and all I wanted was to die. Every day was just sheer agony, and I couldn't see an end to it. But in my darkest hour, when all hope was lost, and all I wanted was death, something happened. The date was November 6th, 2015. This was the day that turned the tide of my life. This was the day that I discovered the truth. This was the day that I felt the presence of something greater than myself. It's as if something had been building and building inside of me. It's as if the pressure of life just took the old me and collapsed it within my heart. And then the pressure just released. Something glorious just exploded within me. And all of the weight and all of the worry just vanished. It was just replaced by a feeling I'd forgotten. I felt love. It felt like a river of flowing, living love. And it was all so tragic and beautiful. And when it happened, I fell to my knees and cried. On my knees with my face to the ground, I felt the thing that everyone speaks of, the will of the world itself. It was so unbelievably real that it was scary. It was as if there were all these connections within my mind and within my heart that synchronized in the blink of an eye. It was as if he took a digital file and just uploaded it into me. 1 minute, I didn't understand. The next minute, I did. It felt as if I was being shown something that I already knew but forgot ages ago. As if I had lived this life before and already knew what was supposed to happen next. I truly felt the presence of God. It was as if a voice spoke without words, and I could understand everything. I had the overwhelming need to start writing about it. It was as if I already knew that I was supposed to write about it, that I was meant to write about it. It was as if I had been given a great gift, and I was supposed to tell the world about it. So, inside of a small leather journal, I began to write what I was experiencing. And it was unlike anything I had ever written. God began to show me the way. And God said there would be a great storm. And the days shall be long and the years shall be many. And you will forget the warmth of the light. And you will cry out many times in pain and believe that I've forsaken you. And in the storm, there was fear and pain and doubt and sorrow. But these things are not of God. And then I looked out upon the void, and I heard music without sound. And I saw light without the sun, and a voice spoke without words. And laid out before me was that place called heaven. And the heaven was not separate from God, for heaven is God, and God is heaven. Like infinite layers of white, moving, breathing lace, it passed over my skin and rolled through my chest. No thing is independent, for here all things become as one. It covers earthly things and takes the form of things not of this earth. And it converged into an epicenter, and the heaven burst open, and from it came the blessed light. And as it washed over me, I wept as I had never wept. The shame of my doubt flowed from my heart with the tears from my eyes. The Father's grace cradled me like an infant, and I knew that this was home. And I prayed that he release me from this earthly bond and let me return home with him. But such a thing would not come to pass as of yet, for it was not in his plan. And God conveyed to me that nothing is without cause, and though my suffering was not in vain, it was also not over. And God said to me, "You have been prepared for this thing you must do. They will say you tell lies. They will say you are not sane. And they will try to hurt you. And in spite of these things, you will not be discouraged. You will not be angered. You will not resent them. And you will not be deterred. For the light of God is love, and love is the light of God." When I stood up from my knees that day in November of 2015, I was a new man with a new understanding. I felt like a child that had to relearn life itself, but this time, it would be at my Father's side. I would relearn everything that I thought I already knew, and it would start with such a simple, obvious thing. God told me to clean. I was to clean everything. I didn't know why, but I just cleaned for days. It was as if the filth of everything became amplified, and I just couldn't clean it enough. Everything was dirty. And when I had cleaned until I could clean no more, God showed me that to clean a home is to prepare that home for the Lord. To bring God in, we must prepare a place for Him. We must be worthy of Him. We must present ourselves to Him, and we must do so honorably and respectably. And this is when the Lord God came into my life, into my home, and most importantly, into my heart. And it all felt so wonderful and magical. And this, brothers and sisters, is where my true story begins.